Welcome to ISO 20022 Made Simple, a special podcast series brought to you by Standard Chartered's Corporate and Investment Bank. I'm Danielle Sharpe, our Global Head of FI Clearing Product in Cash Management. This is our second episode. Last time, you will have heard from Sunday and I, during which I was the guest. Now, in case you missed it, we went back to basics, we spoke a lot about compliance benefits and efficiencies, and we also acknowledged that in order to extract and realize the true benefits of ISO 20022, it really does require an end-to-end view. I will take over as host for this series, and today we are going to dive into a topic that I believe is top of mind for institutions worldwide, ISO 20022 and its impact on data and artificial intelligence. Now, banks globally are at different stages of adoption. And so while we have heard a lot about compliance, today I'm excited to shift the conversation. What does richer data actually mean for banks? And how can AI enhance the efficiency and accuracy of ISO 20022 message processing? To help us unpack this, I am very pleased to be joined by Elena Strbac, our Global Head of Data Science and Innovation for CIB. Welcome, Elena.
Thanks, Danielle. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here.
Me too. So perhaps you could give the audience a little bit of background about the role that you play at Standard Chartered and your experience on this topic.
Of course. So I'm head of data science and innovation for corporate and investment banking. So we're a frontline team who develop AI tools tailored for our business. So our AI strategy is really focused on increasing productivity and on unlocking operational efficiencies. And of course, both of these have the same ultimate goal of improving our client services and client experience.
Super interesting. I think it's such an exciting space to be in at the moment as well. So with that, let's get straight in. So before we get into specifics of ISO 20022, I wondered if we could maybe start by touching on artificial intelligence as an umbrella term and its relevance to payments. I think it's fair to say that everybody's talking about AI, but we know it takes many forms. So maybe you can take us through some of this alongside its existing application in payments as you see it.
Yeah, of course. It's always good to start with clearing up some terminology. So I'll go over three types of AI and how it is already relevant in payments today. So first, I'll start by covering supervised machine learning. So this is where an algorithm learns from known historic events and then uses what it's learned about the past to make predictions about the future. So as an example, let's say that we're trying to predict payment failures. And let's say that we have a nice historic data set where we have payments that we know have previously failed, and we have payments that we know have previously succeeded. A supervised machine learning algorithm could then actually learn the patterns and trends, and it could learn the difference between those two categories. And then when it sees a new payment, it might say, oh, okay, actually, this looks like a failed payment that I've seen in the past, so I'm going to predict that as a failure. Now, the second type of machine learning is called unsupervised machine learning. And this is where we don't have the labels that I just mentioned, but we want the algorithm to learn patterns from the data by itself. And in payments, this is actually particularly important for areas like anomaly detection, which of course, can be used for fraud. It can be used for risk-based client profiling. So as an example, we could get an algorithm to effectively create a fingerprint of historic client behavior by itself. So it learns the patterns of what is normal for a particular client. And then it can produce an alert if the client deviates from that particular fingerprint that the algorithm has learned. So I think that's obviously, like I mentioned, it's very helpful in risk management when it comes to payments, but I think it's actually also helpful for opportunities. So, from our perspective, if we see a client changing behavior, it's not necessarily a bad thing. They could very much be expanding their business into new markets, and, it could be something that we're actually looking to help them with. And the third type, of course, has got to be generative AI, large language models, and natural language processing. So this obviously is the ability of a machine to read and generate human-like language. Now, this is already helpful in payments. So, for example, for reading and structuring unstructured addresses, also for reading and structuring MT 599s or 199s. So, for example, especially where they might contain a payment instruction. So this could actually help increase straight-through processing. And then also in areas like client servicing and onboarding documentation processing.
That's so exciting and really interesting as well. And I think, sitting where I sit, I hear lots of the terminologies, and I think we're looking at how we can leverage and think about these more. And it always fascinates me when we talk about that generative AI piece. And I think we're all on that journey of trying to work out just how and where the right place to use that could be. So I think I hope that the audience is already tuning in and finding this to be as exciting as I am, particularly as we're only just getting started. So, Elena, with 3 different types of AI you've just mentioned, and you've touched on how we're already thinking about them in the context of payments, whether that's reconciliation, anomaly detection, processing, performance. Maybe I'll move us into something else I'm interested in understanding your views on, and that's really how you see ISO 20022 and AI coming together to shape the future of what we see financial messaging to become.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And what I think is really exciting is that I think we're going to see ISO becoming an enabler for AI. And at the same time, I think we'll see AI becoming an enabler for ISO. So I know obviously organizations are very busy preparing for the November 2025 deadline to make sure that they can still make and receive payments. But while they do that, I would really encourage institutions to take a broader view and look at the challenges and opportunities that ISO 20022 will bring, and then how to also prepare for those in parallel. So let's first talk about ISO as an enabler for AI. So I think it's obviously very clear that ISO will lead to richer data. And typically with AI, which is all about the data inputs, richer data should lead to better predictions. So we've already talked about a couple of use cases of AI in payments. So I think that those continue, but we should start seeing them actually benefiting and improving from the richer data that ISO will bring. So this is where I would really encourage organizations to think about their data capture, which is obviously key to all of this. So for example, how are organizations going to capture the mandatory versus optional XML tags? How are they going to do their data validation? How are they going to account for any potential data truncation? So these are all going to be important because all of these data points eventually could become inputs to AI algorithms, and the higher the quality of that data, the better the predictions will be.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a huge amount of attention on that at the moment, and even internally, I know we're discussing a lot of that too. So really, really great one.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It all comes back to the data. Secondly, I think we'll also see financial institutions and consortiums of financial institutions really differentiate themselves with how well they manage to use the new, richer ISO data together, especially in the fight against financial crime. So typically speaking, I think when it comes to fraud and financial crime, I think organizations are better off doing that together rather than individually. And I think that we will see some real differentiation between correspondent banking consortiums in the future.
I completely agree. And I honestly think that with this shift, and potentially banks, working together in ways that we haven't necessarily done in the past, we can start moving from reactive, I guess, to predictive. And I suppose that's where you're going with this, and anticipating fraud before it even happens, and automating things in ways that certainly we've not been able to do in the past. So really, really fascinating and exciting times ahead.
Yeah, I think predictive rather than reactive is a great way of putting it. Okay. And the third point I wanted to call out, regarding ISO being an enabler for AI, is that actually I think that we might see cases where we can actually reduce our usage of AI when the new structured ISO format comes in, which is important, right? Because at the moment, a lot of what we're doing is, we're trying to use AI to make sense out of unstructured data, which is obviously, very powerful and very helpful. But it's also important to remember that, AI is never going to be 100% effective. And whenever we use it, we actually have to think about how are we managing the risk of that, 5 or 10% when AI gets it wrong? So there are actually certain cases where it might be more helpful to us to, if the data becomes structured instead of unstructured, we can actually simplify our approach and, stop trying to use AI where we don't really need it.
That's super interesting. I'm glad you just explained that, because I was about to ask, how do you see that moving, and how do you see the opportunity? But I think you're right. If we're in a world where we have more structured data, we can make sense of it. We're all reading from the same dictionary, as it were, and we know exactly what it means. Then actually the ability for us to truly know what it means without having to interpret it in ways we are today becomes really, really opportunistic, and we don't need to do the things that we've been grappling with for so long. So thank you for that perspective. I think that's a really interesting one.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about how we name screen, even when we have more structured data that will specifically tell us what is a vessel's name and what is a person's name, we no longer have to try to use AI and try to read the information in context and guess. We can actually just screen the right names against the right lists, and I'm hoping that we'll see much lower false positive rates that way.
Yeah, you're so right.
All right, so now I'll move on to talking about how AI can be an enabler for ISO. So I think it's pretty clear that MX is actually more complex than MT. So, we've got about 1,500 potential data points to be populated in PAX 008 alone. So, for example, I think where organizations could start looking at AI to enable their ISO journey is by using AI for data validation, or using AI for language translation, reading regional dialect variations, standardizing terminology. Of course, remembering that even though ISO is going to be much more structured, there is still going to be some remaining unstructured text. And then I think another interesting area is going to be GLEI. So while the global adoption of GLEI increases, I think we will see that as an increasingly populated field in ISO. And once that starts happening, I think that there'll be an opportunity for organizations to actually use, an AI entity resolution type of engine to actually match that external GLEI to their internal clients in real time.
Thanks for sharing those thoughts, Elena. Look, I think we all know that banks globally are on different levels of their migration, their readiness, their transition. Some are leading the charge, some are still catching up. And as we sit here in February 2025, some still have quite a long way to go. So for those banks that are still in transition, would you say that these are perhaps some of the low-hanging fruits when they think about the opportunity for AI? Is that perhaps where they should focus first in your view?
Yeah, I know there is so much to do between now and November 2025. But what I would say, just in summary, is that, of course, organizations need to get themselves ISO ready as priority to make payments. But I would really encourage organizations to get themselves AI ready and look at their AI strategies in parallel to complement that, so that they are best placed to maximize on those further opportunities when we get there.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'm going to move us into the topic of CBPR Plus. I think all our listeners will be very familiar with that term, and the deadline's getting closer. Now, I think we all agree that there is merit in leveraging ISO 20022 as a catalyst for transformation and improved use of technology. But I'm interested in how you're seeing the discussions evolve around this in cross-border payments. And maybe we'll start with specifically around efficiencies.
When it comes to driving efficiencies in cross-border, what I think is really key is for the organization to know its processes, which can sometimes be very complex when it comes to cross-border, but to really know these processes inside out. And that's because the key is going to be the collaboration between the people who know the processes very well and the people in the organization who know the AI very well. And this is how the organization is going to figure out where AI can actually add most value to its specific processes. And we've already talked about the fact that, AI isn't an answer to everything necessarily. There are some times where we actually don't want to use it, and it's no different here. And what I think is actually really important is that organizations also use this as an opportunity to look at process simplification. Because if a process is overly complex, overly complicated, with lots of interplay between different teams, I think the important thing to remember is that AI, at least with the current models that we have, is probably not going to learn it either with a high enough degree of accuracy for it to actually be used.
I think that's really, really important, because the reality is many of our processes are very complicated, and there's lots of handoffs that exist across different teams, and we've built and designed various operating manuals and processes and designs that have existed for many, many years. And so I think process simplification is a really interesting and important aspect for us to focus on, but particularly I think that point around having the cross collaboration between data experts, AI experts, as well as those that just know the process day in, day out and can really come together to think about it in a different way.
Absolutely. And yeah, great opportunity to get the processes themselves AI ready.
And finally, perhaps let's spend a minute or so on client-centric innovation. Now, of course, at the heart of everything we do, clients are at the center of our products and our services, but particularly when it comes to ISO, cross-border payments or other, how are you seeing the discussions evolve in the context of AI?
So when it comes to clients, what I think we'll see is, an improvement in client analytics and nearer real-time client analytics. So, for example, using the richer ISO data to create more personalization, more product personalization, better client insight about their payments, helping clients to optimize their cash flow, and in summary, just value-added services rather than just payment processing, I think will be an outcome of ISO.
Okay. We've spoken a lot about positives. Now, I'm really interested in your views around how we balance this with practicality. Now, whether that's regulatory, you already touched earlier about the number of new data fields that ISO 20022 presents, perhaps more complicated than before. And maybe we should also bring this back to reality of implementation. We know that many banks will be using translators. We know many banks have varying readiness levels. And so even some of the front runners are facing challenges with different interpretations and lack of uniformity across different schemes. And we touched on some of this in the prior episode as well. So with that in mind, where do you think that banks need to be most mindful whilst they're on their transition and whilst they're thinking about their AI journey in parallel?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There are going to be so many challenges around regulations and data and readiness as we embark on this journey. And I mean, obviously, the main goal is going to be able to make payments and be able to do so in a compliant manner. But if we start thinking beyond that, I think the key to navigating all of these challenges is to have a just super clear vision and strategy on, what we as FIs are actually collectively trying to achieve. So as FIs, what is it that we actually want to do? So I would say that what we want to do is to unlock the upside potential for ISO. So then if we think about, okay, so how are we going to unlock that upside potential? So obviously the answer to that is we're going to do it in lots of different ways. But since this is an AI episode, I would say that, one way to achieving that goal is by having an AI strategy that goes with the ISO strategy. So then we think about, okay, so what's going to be in our AI strategy? And I think that there are really 5 key areas to that. The first is skills and talent. So while most organizations already have teams of data scientists who have expertise in AI, the question is, do they also have the expertise in ISO to know how to realize that potential? And then so in parallel, do the ISO experts have enough expertise in AI to know where the opportunities are? And if not, how is the organization going to upskill? And part 2 is around governance framework. So when enriched ISO data is used in models, I think, organizations should think about whether there is a chance that, new biases are going to be introduced, or is there going to be sufficient transparency around any new usage of AI, and are any new AI models going to be sufficiently explainable enough? I think that's what organizations need to think about as part of their governance framework that will go with their ISO strategy.
I agree. It's even probably 10 years ago when machine learning was, kind of on the cusp of being discussed. I think even then, trying to grapple with models and explain them to regulators, so important. I can absolutely resonate with that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that explainability point is really key. And that's true for, whether we're using built AI models or bought AI models, either way, we have to be able to explain them. The third area is tech stack and data. So this is about, how are organizations retrieving and collecting the right level of data to really facilitate the benefits of ISO. So for example, how they're going to store it, how are they going to query it, do they have enough compute power to process and run AI algorithms? Is all of this happening on cloud or on-prem? So, all of this needs to be part of the organization's strategy.
Yeah.
And the fourth area is operating model. So who is responsible for what in the organization? So who is designing the data storage and the tech stack? Who is running the AI use cases? Are they working together? And then the fifth area that I'd encourage organizations to look at are their use cases. So what actually are the new use cases that are going to help us unlock this upside potential of ISO? How they're going to be prioritized? And again, are the ISO experts and the AI experts working together to actually figure this out?
I think that's a really interesting way of depicting an AI strategy, and so much around collaboration in there, which again becomes so key to success. And I think we can all resonate
It's absolutely
with that.
critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's interesting because a lot of the time people say to me, and I'm sure many others as well, listening to today's episode, will AI remove my role? And what's the risk that it presents? And actually, I think that there's probably more benefit and opportunity than there is risk at this stage. We've got a huge amount to do, and so with that upskilling and with the new perspectives that come and the different ways of being able to work, I genuinely do see huge amount of opportunity and a lot of work to be done over the years to come.
Yeah, of course. And the way that I see it is that, AI will really enable us to operate at a higher level. And I do think the benchmark and the expectations will raise with that.
No, I agree. And I also think that, particularly on the topic of ISO, at some stage, it's not going to be enough just for us to be ISO compliant, and for us to be able to process payments. And so, really getting ahead and to everything that you've mentioned today in terms of strategizing, thinking about low-hanging fruits and where you might be able to start. I really do think that there's a lot to be considered in ensuring that we keep up with client demand and expectation as well.
Absolutely. I think that's the critical point here, which is that, yes, of course, step one, we want to make payments and we want to do so in a compliant manner. But there's just so much beyond that there is an opportunity to plan for even now.
Great. So I'm going to move into maybe my last but one question. And this one is more about the future. Now, I'm not expecting you to have a crystal ball, but I am interested to see what you might think. So as the industry moves towards faster, cheaper, greater transparency in cross-border payments, what do you think the future might hold for AI in that context?
Yeah, I think there could be an exciting future for cross-border payments. So first point, we've already talked about collaboration a couple of times, but I think that there will be an opportunity for greater co-creation between banks. So, for example, building AI-driven check engines between two correspondent banks, which could, identify settlements instructions and cross-border payment instructions or amendments and check them for completeness against predefined criteria. The AI could suggest corrections and, identify the process failures before they happen and before manual intervention is required. And this, I think, obviously will start to improve client experience overall, as well as reduce cost and increase straight-through processing.
I agree. I think that's a really, really critical one. Lots of attention right now in terms of pre-validation and, how do we prevent losses, particularly as things get faster, but also how do we ensure that the instructions are formatted in the right way from the outset as well. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then I think the second area, which will be interesting, is AI products. So we obviously already have tech companies who create AI products, like OpenAI has created GPT. But what I think will be interesting in future is to see whether banks are going to start creating AI products that are specific to their business, such as cross-border. So as an example, could banks start providing AI-powered models for FX market liquidity prediction or currency volatility prediction, which are obviously all very important components for their cross-border services.
I think we could say that the future's bright then. Certainly compelling and, presents more competitive and advanced ways of thinking about things when it comes to cross-border payments. Great. Now, before we close on today's episode, I do have one final question. What is the one myth or misconception about ISO 20022 that you would like to debunk?
It's a great question. And then interestingly, I also asked ChatGPT the same question. and what it said was that ISO isn't just a boring bank standard, that every major financial institution, real-time payments, blockchain, AI-driven fraud detection are either adopting or being influenced by ISO. So it then described it as a stealthy superhero of finance, quietly revolutionizing how money moves behind the scenes.
Wow, I do love the way that ChatGPT manages to articulate some of its answers. And do you agree with that, or do you have other perspectives that you would add in addition to ChatGPT's?
I don't know why ChatGPT ever assumed that there was a myth that ISO was boring to start with. But going back to my own views, I want to link back to what you were saying in your podcast, that debunking the myth that ISO isn't an immediate solution to all of our problems. And that there is an expectation that we're going to see some sort of immediate decline in false positives when it comes to monitoring, whereas in reality it would take us some time to figure that out. Yeah. So I think the same is really true for AI. So AI is also not going to be an immediate solution to all of our problems. It's important to remember that in most use cases, AI is going to require a lot of historic data to actually learn from. In order to be effective, and that this will take time to build up. Yeah, so obviously there is some ISO adoption already, but to really get a critical mass of global ISO 20022 payments, we're probably looking at collecting around 2 years worth of high quality data until we can truly start seeing the improvements in accuracy that the AI models can bring.
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess, but when you think about it like that, it sounds like a very long time. So, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing anything, and I think that's the point, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, the forward-looking view, and there's, like I said, there's so many opportunities that we could be planning to capture even now.
Excellent. Elena, this has been such an insightful conversation. I think ISO 20022 clearly is more than just a standard, and to ChatGPT's point, it's not necessarily boring.
Absolutely not.
I think we can honestly see this as a bit of a data revolution. And if I reflect back on some of the points that you've mentioned today, how that data can power AI when structured and used in the right manner, as well as drive efficiencies and enhance customer experience along the way, I think we're in for a very positive and bright future ahead. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time today. It's been absolutely wonderful to sit here and get to speak with you. So thank you. And for those tuning in, I'd love to understand a little bit more about how you're approaching your ISO journey and how AI is playing into that. Please do share your insights, reach out to your RM if there's things that you'd like to understand more about where Standard Chartered could help you with that journey too. And we'd be very, very happy to keep that conversation going. Thank you all for listening, and don't forget to look out for our future episodes in this series, and we look forward to seeing you all then.